manpower didn't mean anything to them. They just keep waves. In fact, the first wave, oftentimes they wouldn't even have rifles. They'd wait till somebody else was killed and then they'd take that rifle. It was like a shooting gallery, really, a lot of the time. It had to be for us to do that with that many of them versus what we had.
You are about to embark upon the Great Crusade.
To meet this mounting aggression.
And make no mistake about it, good will prevail.
Now, you actually joined a little bit earlier than you should have, right?
Yes.
Tell me about that.
Well, some of the other guys were doing it, and it looked kind of romantic, a nice uniform, and you could go into the beer hall and so on and so forth. So I fudged my age a bit, and I was in on a 3-year enlistment. And when that expired, I thought I'd have enough, but they told me I had to bring back my uniforms and so on and so forth. So. Or pay $92. That's an awful lot of money. And I said, what are my options? I said, well, you could re-enlist. So I re-enlisted, and within a year I was in Korea.
So you ended up in Korea because of $92.
Exactly.
Wow.
Not very smart, but.
Now, you were a rifleman in Korea. Were you trained initially as a rifleman?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And what type of weapon were you trained on?
M1.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Did it come pretty easily to you? Were you a good marksman?
Fairly decent. Coming from Minnesota, you do get involved with guns a bit, so I was a fairly decent marksman.
When did you find out that you were likely going to Korea?
Probably August of 1950, or late July, or shortly after the war broke out. The war broke out on June 25th, so sometime shortly after that.
Before then, did you know much about Korea?
I didn't have any idea. I didn't know where it was or anything about it, really.
So when you arrived in Korea, what was the situation there?
Chaotic. Things had happened awfully fast for the Koreans and for the U.S. support, and so things were. They seemed chaotic, but they were actually pretty well orchestrated. You know, if everybody did their job, it all worked good. But to me, as a former civilian, it looked like it was out of hand, but it wasn't.
When in 1950 did you arrive? Were we still in the Pusan perimeter? Were we around Incheon?
No, I came in at Wonsan.
Okay.
Wonsan Harbor. We had to wait out in the harbor for a while because they had a lot of mines that they had to sweep out first. So as soon as they got that done, we joined the group and started our trek toward the Chosin Reservoir.
How did that, at first the trek was going well, correct?
Yes, it seemed like, they told us that the war was almost over. They had a little mopping up to do of some North Koreans that were still there. But we found out a lot different after the Chinese entered the war.
Well, that was obviously the game-changing event there in November of 1950. How did you find out?
Well, we took some captives and found out, but the people in Tokyo that were supposedly running the war wouldn't believe that there was Chinese there. They said they would never come in. Well, they were there, but the Chinese did a real good job of camouflaging themselves, so they were completely around us before we had any idea they were there. And it was roughly 130,000 people, I guess, Chinese. So they did a real good job of, they would only move at night, not during the day, so we didn't have a clue until they were coming after us.
So you had North Korean prisoners telling you that the Chinese were coming and the higher-ups didn't believe you?
No, we had Chinese tell us that. The Chinese that we captured. They said that in fact, they were very open about what we were against. They even said that there were a couple of 100,000 more on the other side of the Yalu River in case the first batch didn't get the job done.
Amazing, amazing. Explain what's happening as you discover you're surrounded. What orders are you getting? What's the atmosphere like with you and the other men?
Well, it happened very suddenly in the middle of the night. It was about 1 or 2 in the morning. We heard these bugles and clattering and whistles going and people screaming. It was really kind of made you wonder what was happening. And there, that was the Chinese coming after us. And by the time we knew that, they were all around us. And the first thing they did is came in and looked for anybody in a sleeping bag, and they would stab them. So that was our awakening to it. Then we realized that we were completely surrounded, so you had to be very careful so that you didn't shoot some of your own people. Everybody kind of, well, they did their job, so it worked out the way it was supposed to work out. We took the toll on a lot of Chinese. The one bad battle I was in, at Hill number 1520, they counted the next day that there were 342 Chinese dead. And I'm not sure of our count, but it was like in the 20s. So our training paid off.
This video is sponsored by 4patriots.com. 4Patriots has made it their mission to ensure that we are all prepared for any situation or environment. No matter what situation you find yourself in, you can trust that 4Patriots will have your back. AVC has this crazy team member that likes to go out into the mountains and run for days and days and days. So in his base camp, he wants some quick and easy electricity. He regularly uses the Patriot Power Generator 2000X when he's out in the mountains and in other obscure locations. That power pack uses the endless free power of the sun to power your lights, your TV, medical equipment, or even your fridge. Plus, it's expandable and comes with a free solar panel. We had the folks at 4Patriots set up a special page for you at 4patriots.com/ABC so you can see any deals or any specials that they're running at this time. Go to 4patriots.com/ABC to support this video.
What kind of orders were you given once you were surrounded? What were your commanders telling you?
Well, at first it was a 50% watch. And we put up the tripwires and so on so that we'd know of anybody coming in. And then the word came that there were more Chinese or people out there than they imagined, so they put us on 100% watch. And then, like I say, suddenly all we hear was these bugles and all this terrible racket. And it was intimidating at first until we realized what was going on. That's the way they told their men what to do. So we battled until, I believe it was starting to get light. It was 6 o'clock or so in the morning before we had a chance to really kind of regroup. And it was kind of a rude awakening to this whole thing. That we thought, we were told that we'd fight our way up through North Korea, and there were ships waiting for us, and we'd go home. We'd be there for Christmas. So this was quite a change in agenda.
Major change in momentum. Now, you mentioned that they were, the Chinese were stabbing or bayoneting sleeping bags, trying to kill the Marines. At the same time, you've got horrible weather conditions there with the cold. Explain just how cold it was.
Well, we had two enemies, the Chinese and the weather. The weather was, I'm from Minnesota, so I was kind of used to weather, but this was something else. We went 20 to, they say, 30 below zero weather. And in Minnesota, when it's cold like that, you've got a place you can go in and get warm and so on. In Korea, we couldn't. I mean, you were just out in it all the time. And the sleeping bag incident, where the two guys were killed on the first attack. So from then on, we didn't dare use our sleeping bags. So we might wrap them around our feet or wear them like a jacket for a while. But the weather was just, it was horrible. We weren't trained for that. We had to learn how to cope. For an example, everything froze. The food froze, the water froze, and we learned to take food that we wanted and shove it inside of our shirt. And so 8 hours or so later, it'd be warm enough that you could open it up and eat it. The other thing was that if you didn't keep moving, you'd freeze to death. There were a lot of bodies that were absolutely, well, frozen in the position that they were last in, whether it was with their rifle or sleeping or whatever happened. And that was pretty grotesque. We had a lot of things happen that we weren't used to, just things like that we had to learn fast. And I was lucky. I was a reserve when I went. I was first replacement draft when I got into Korea, and so I buddied up to a fellow that was a regular Marine and had been through combat, and so that was a real lucky break for me because he gave me the quick education on
What did he teach
dig
you?
that foxhole a little deeper and that type of thing. In fact, he actually saved my life twice. One of them was when the Chinese came to my side and I made a move to shoot him, and my rifle had frozen with just a click. And this man, Riley, shot and killed the Chinese, so saved my life. He taught me a lot of things about don't be satisfied with a shallow foxhole. Keep digging, even though the ground was like rock.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to ask. Could you dig a foxhole when the ground's that cold?
It was hard. You take your K9 knife and just break it up as much as you could. But it was very tempting to stop and not do it. But a lot of the guys took pieces of wood and so on and so forth and built kind of a barrier around the foxhole. His advice to me was really well taken. Sometimes I didn't want to do what he suggested, but one night a mortar went off right behind us and killed two guys right behind us. And if we hadn't had a deep foxhole, we'd have been dead. We were kicked out of the foxhole by the concussion. But if we'd have been more toward the surface, we'd have been either killed or seriously wounded. So he was my savior. He was my guardian angel.
So, because digging foxholes was so difficult and you couldn't stay in your sleeping bags, what methods did you have for protection or just staying warm or trying to stay warm?
We didn't have very much of either one. One of the things we had to do, whether you wanted to or not, was keep moving. If you didn't move, like some people that were wounded and so on, and they had to stop, they froze to death. It was just as simple as that. We knew it was on the other side, so we had to, in the daylight when they weren't attacking us, we could wrap the sleeping bags around us and so on, and we could build a fire and warm some chow. But that night, you were on guard all the time, and that's kind of what wears you down too. You get so exhausted, and the cold weather also helps exhaust you, and you're eating frozen chow. So I mean, you got a lot of strikes against you, but we wouldn't have made it out of there, I don't believe, unless it was as well orchestrated as it was. I mean, the Air Force was protecting us, and they'd keep firing at the communists and keep their heads down. So it gave us a chance to react more. If they'd have been able to swarm in the numbers that they had, it would have been bad.
As the Chinese had you encircled, how did they try to attack you, and how did you try to respond or take the fight to them?
We more often took a defensive nature because of that there were so few of us compared to how
Right.
many of them there were. And they would, the manpower didn't mean anything to them. They just keep waves. In fact, the first wave, oftentimes they wouldn't even have rifles. They'd wait till somebody else was killed and then they'd take that rifle. It was like a shooting gallery, really, a lot of the time. It had to be for us to do that with that many of them versus what we had.
So they did not value their soldiers' lives.
No,
at
they
all.
they were more interested, I think, in trying to get food if they made an advance or whatever, and they weren't, for the most part, weren't dressed very well. I did have one case where a friend in our group named David kind of disappeared. And everybody said, well, where'd he go? Where is he? And so on. Nobody knew. And 3-4 days later, somebody shot a Chinese soldier and wearing David's clothing. And those kind of things are they're hard to look at. I mean, I don't know. It's painful.
How did they deal with wounded service members? How did you evacuate
Well,
them?
that was a problem. It was hard to evacuate them from the reservoir. Once we got down a bit further, breaking out of there, then we could. But it was a case of making them as comfortable as we could. The corpsmen, for plasma and so on, they'd have to put it in their mouth to keep it from freezing, or morphine, or painkiller. The wounded, it was really hard because they almost had to stack them up, and a lot of them were on the trucks, and if they were wounded so bad that they couldn't be mobile at all, they'd freeze to death, and we saw a lot of that.
I've heard many reports of hand-to-hand fighting at Chosin Reservoir. Did you experience that?
Yes, yeah, it was so close in that as I mentioned earlier, you're cautious in your shooting because you didn't want to shoot your own people, and we had a close combat like that. That can be a problem. So yes, there was hand to hand.
What's that like?
When it's over, it's scary. But when it's happening, you're just so busy doing what you're taught to do that I don't remember ever being scared when it was happening. But boy, after it was over, it becomes a reality then, and it's I don't know how to say it, but it shakes you.
Now, you were wounded. Was that at Chosin Reservoir?
Yes, not wounded. I was froze both my feet bad, and I was telling you about the foxhole that was deep enough to protect us from shrapnel, but we got blown out of there. I got kind of banged up a bit, but that left no repercussions of that.
How did they resupply you when you're totally surrounded?
A lot of it was by parachute. Before they blew up the bridge, there was only one supply route, one road. And when the Chinese watched us go into the trap, and once we were in there, they blew up the only bridge that we could get out through. And so therefore we were pretty much dependent on airdrops of supplies, both ammo and food, whatever we needed.
And parts of the bridge to rebuild it, right?
Yeah, that was amazing. That was one of the miracles of the war, as far as I'm concerned, that they could take and somebody remembered that there was a Sedgway Bridge over in Japan, and they put their thoughts together and flew over. They dropped one first, and the parachutes weren't enough. They didn't support the part of the bridge, so it come crashing down. So after that, they had extra parachutes and so on, and they dropped 8 of those. The guys put it in position, and it was our way of survival. And I just marvel that all came together.
So tell me how you finally escaped from Chosin Reservoir. Was it once the bridge was completed?
Yes, that kind of opened the way, but we had to fight our way all the way down. I mean, the Chinese were not going to give up that easily.
What was that like? Describe that fighting.
Well, sporadic. What they would do is try and slow our convoy down. They would shoot the drivers of the trucks or jeeps or whatever. That was a favorite because that would stop everything. And every time that happened and the possession stopped, you'd have to get out and start combat again to break it loose and clear the nest and get rid of the Chinese, even if it meant pushing the truck over the edge of the mountain. You did what you had to do. A lot of it was textbook. and a lot of it wasn't. But the part that really kept things going, I think, is the fact that everybody supported each other. If they hadn't done that, if they had just kind of ran rampant and scrambled, we'd all been buried up there.
How was the escape organized? Where were you in the convoy and that sort of thing?
Well, we were toward the end of it. Item Company was carried up the rear when we first were leaving the reservoir. We kept our big guns at the end, of course, and kept lobbing them over into the Chinese. But you could see them coming over the ridges as we proceeded out. Kind of an eerie feeling. You feel very powerless. I mean, you have to do what you have to do, and you want to do that, but you feel like you'd like to do more, and you're kind of limited.
Now, the thing most Americans take from the story of Chosin Reservoir is the fact that the Marines were able to escape. They weren't annihilated there. But what sometimes gets overshadowed is it still came at a very heavy cost.
Oh, terrible. Terrible. One man is a heavy cost, but this was a lot of men. A lot of men wounded. I think, if I remember correctly, there was 35,000 killed in the whole war. That's some people from other countries too, of course. But, that was very expensive war in the way of human beings and disabilities, what have you. It was hard.
You lost some close friends there.
A lot of them, yeah, that was hard. This Riley I was talking about that saved me so many times, on December 3rd, he got killed. And a couple other real close friends. December 3rd, for some reason, was the toughest on my friends.
What was it like when you were finally free from that horrible situation?
Unbelievable. I got flown to Japan. I was in the hospital, and we were hungry because we weren't eating right. We were eating anything frozen, and I remember they told me you can have anything you want to eat. What would you like? And I said, oh boy, a chocolate malt. And I wolfed that down, and it came right back up. I got so sick because my body wasn't used to that. But for a long time it didn't feel possible that it was out of there. And a few years back I had a chance to go back there, and I didn't know if I even wanted to go back there, but I did, and I'm so glad I did, because I saw that what we did was right. It was the right thing to do. The Koreans have taken and made a beautiful country out of it, and they're so appreciative right to this day. They're just it's like it happened yesterday. They're wonderful people as far as I'm concerned.
When you see the difference between North and South Korea now, how does that make you feel?
It's amazing. It tells me it was the right thing to do, painful as it was, and I wouldn't do it again, but I'm so glad I did it. I really started to think about what this was worth, going to a country I didn't know and fighting for people that I didn't know. But when I look back at it now, if they hadn't decided to fight that war and stop the communists, they'd have kept going. I really believe that they would have felt pretty powerful if nobody said no. And I think they would have gone to Japan and the Philippines. Who else? They'd have kept going. So we did the right thing.